You don't arrive at this realization with relief. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed. A moment where you pause long enough to sense yourself still here, still breathing, still responding. You've spent so much time bracing for the idea that something inside you must have shattered, that it feels strange to find yourself intact. You remember how certain you were, that you couldn't carry anymore. How often you told yourself that this was the point where things would finally give way. You felt stretched thin, worn down, changed by what you went through in ways you didn't fully understand. It made sense to assume damage, to believe that something essential had been lost. There's a familiar heaviness in that assumption, the quiet grief of thinking you've been altered beyond repair, that whatever you were before is gone now, replaced by something weaker or smaller. You've carried that story with you, sometimes without realizing it, letting it shape how you see yourself, how much you expect from yourself, how gently you treat what remains. Being here now doesn't erase what happened. The pain is still part of you, the fatigue, the tenderness, the ways you learned to protect yourself. None of that disappears. You're not pretending otherwise. You're just noticing that underneath all of it, you're still present, still capable of feeling, still aware, still able to recognize yourself, even if the shape feels different. There's a cautiousness in this moment. You don't want to rush to conclusions. You don't want to declare strength where there's still vulnerability. You simply notice that you didn't vanish. You didn't collapse completely. The worst moments passed through you, and you're still here to notice that fact. You're standing in the space where the assumption of being broken loosens slightly. Not enough to disappear, just enough to let another possibility exist alongside it. The possibility that you bent, that you were affected, that you were changed, but that something essential held. You don't celebrate that yet. You just let it be true for a moment. You stayed in the belief that you were broken longer than you meant to. Not because you wanted to see yourself that way, because it explained so much. It gave shape to the exhaustion, the difficulty, the way things didn't come easily anymore. Calling yourself broken made the weight feel justified. It made the struggle make sense. You carried that story quietly. You didn't always say it out loud, but it shaped how you treated yourself. You lowered expectations. You apologized internally for needing more time, more rest, more care. You assumed limits where there were wounds. You learned to move carefully, as if something fragile inside you might give way if you asked too much. It was a strange comfort in it. If you were broken, then the difficulty wasn't a personal failure. It was damage. It was cause and effect. You could stop questioning why things felt harder than they used to. You could stop searching for another explanation. Broken became a way to rest from trying to understand yourself. You stayed because letting go of that belief felt risky. If you weren't broken, then what did all this pain mean? What did it say about what you went through, about how deeply it affected you? You worried that releasing the label might erase the seriousness of what you endured, that it might suggest you should be over it by now. So you kept it close. You let it shape your self-talk. You allowed it to define how much you trusted yourself, how far you reached, how much pressure you thought you could survive. You weren't punishing yourself. You were protecting yourself from disappointment, from asking for more than you could give. You stayed longer than you wanted to in that explanation because it felt safer than uncertainty, because it honored the pain without requiring you to reinterpret it, because it gave you a reason to be gentle with yourself, even if it also kept you smaller. And now you're here, noticing how long you've been carrying that idea, not rejecting it, not clinging to it either, just seeing it clearly as something that once helped you survive and may no longer need to hold you the way it used to. Believing you were broken carried a cost you didn't always notice. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself as harm. It showed up quietly in the way you approached yourself, in how cautiously you moved through decisions, in how little you expected things to feel steady again. When you see yourself as damaged, you start relating to your own life differently. You hesitate before reaching. You assume limits before you test them. You treat your reactions as evidence of fragility instead of responses shaped by experience. Even moments of strength feel provisional, as if they might not hold. It costs you trust in your own resilience, not confidence, something deeper. The sense that you can move through difficulty without falling apart. You begin to see effort as risk, engagement as something that might expose a crack you haven't accounted for yet. So you conserve, you pull back, you protect what you believe is already compromised. There's also a quiet loneliness in it. When you think you're broken, you stand slightly apart from yourself. You watch your reactions instead of inhabiting them. You treat your inner life as something that needs managing rather than something you can stand inside of. That distance is subtle, but it adds up. You might notice a dull ache here. Not grief exactly, more like the absence of something you didn't realize you'd lost. The ease of trusting that you can bend without snapping. The comfort of knowing you're allowed to experience strain without it meaning collapse. None of this means the belief was foolish or self-punishing. It served a purpose. It gave you a way to honor what you went through. It protected you from minimizing your pain. But it also asked you to live as if the damage was permanent. That's the cost you're touching now. Not dramatically, just honestly. The recognition that treating yourself as broken kept you careful, but it also kept you from fully recognizing what endured, what adapted, what stayed intact beneath everything that changed. It doesn't arrive as relief. There's no sudden lightness, no moment where you feel strong or certain. What happens is quieter than that, almost easy to miss. A soft loosening in the way you've been holding yourself, as if something you thought you had to brace for doesn't quite ask for that anymore. You notice it in how your body settles, not collapsing, not guarding, just resting where it is. The constant readiness eases a little, the sense that you need to be careful with every movement, every feeling, every thought, loses some of its urgency. You don't announce this to yourself, you don't label it. You just notice the absence of strain. There's a moment where you realize you're not waiting for the next crack to appear. You're not scanning yourself for signs that something is about to give. You're simply here, existing in your own shape without monitoring whether it's holding together properly. That's new. Or maybe it isn't new, just unfamiliar after so long. This shift doesn't feel like trust yet. It feels more like neutrality. Like you're no longer assuming the worst about yourself by default. You don't rush to reassure yourself, and you don't rush to doubt yourself either. You let things stand as they are for a few seconds longer than you usually would. You might feel a hint of uncertainty here, a question that doesn't demand an answer. What if nothing is actually breaking right now? What if the damage you've been guarding against has already done what it needed to do and stopped there? You don't try to resolve that. You don't turn it into a conclusion. You simply stay in the moment where effort drops away, where you're not repairing or proving or holding yourself together. The moment where you realize that nothing is actively falling apart. It's a small shift, subtle, quiet, but it changes how the moment feels. And for now, that change is enough to notice. You are here now, not in a moment of victory, not relieved in the way stories usually promise, just steadier than you expected to be. The tension you once carried as proof of damage isn't pressing in the same way. You notice that you're not bracing for collapse. You're not checking yourself for signs of failure. You're simply present in your own body, without the constant question of whether you're about to fall apart. Nothing dramatic has changed. The past hasn't been rewritten. The pain didn't disappear. You still remember what it took to get here. The fear, the exhaustion, the long stretches where it felt like survival required everything you had. Those memories don't vanish. They don't need to. They don't define the moment you're in now. What's different is quieter. You no longer relate to yourself as something fragile that needs constant monitoring. You don't assume that strain automatically means damage. You let yourself feel tired without interpreting it as failure. You let difficulty exist without turning it into evidence that you're broken. That shift isn't loud, but it changes how you stand inside yourself. There's a calm that comes from not having to explain your endurance. You don't need to frame yourself as strong. You don't need to convince yourself that you've healed. You simply recognize that you're still here, still functioning, still capable of holding what life places in front of you. Not perfectly, but sufficiently, honestly. You notice how much pressure falls away when you stop waiting for proof that you're intact. When you stop treating resilience as something you have to earn. You allow yourself to be changed without being diminished, affected without being undone. This place isn't an ending. It's a steadier place, one where you don't need to perform survival or prove recovery. You can rest in the fact of what endured, what adapted, what stayed. You are here now, still human, still carrying your story, and still whole in the ways that matter. This is where things are clear again.